Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving weekend with family and friends, but now that the calendar has turned to December, it's time to end this year on a strong note with a bunch of entertaining podcasts, starting with this one, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as last Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now as we get to this final month, as we approach the the final quarter pole, the last four games. We still have a game tonight, and then obviously got to get through an NFL weekend this upcoming weekend. We could finally start to see how the playoff races are taking into shape. And to me, it's all about the NFC. I know the AFC is top heavy with Kansas City, Baltimore. You want to throw in Pittsburgh, okay, fine. Baltimore taking a step down, but a lot of people know that they could be a dangerous team. And yes, we could even talk about the NFC being top heavy, and that's where I want to begin. Because now as we get to these final 5 games, and after this coming weekend, no more buys. You have 6 more teams that'll have buys. I'll get into the schedule on Thursday's podcast. But for right this very second, what's intriguing me is what is taking place not only at the top, whether it's Detroit, Philadelphia, Minnesota, but even what's happening in the middle. And granted that those teams are probably not going to have a say when it comes to a championship weekend or even a Super Bowl for that matter. But as we're looking at the NFC South and the NFC West, it is certainly a fight that's going to probably go down to the very last couple, if not the final weekend of the NFL season. And I'll get to those 2 divisions later on, but I want to start off with the top. Yes, I'm going to go through some of these games, but we know about the Lions and everything that they've done and everything that I've espoused as far as how great they are, how they are a team that probably is going to be coming out of the NFC in New Orleans for the first time in their franchise's history to represent in a Super Bowl. But they do have 2 teams that are nipping on their heels. And even with Thanksgiving having to sweat out that game, they dominated that first half, leading 16-0. And then the Bears came all the way back to where Matt Eberflus, for whatever the reason, 26 seconds to go, had a brain cramp because he had one more timeout in his back pocket. He happened to let the clock run down to 6 seconds in the final play, and where Caleb Williams was trying to get to the end zone. And even though I understand rookie quarterback, but he should have had the wherewithal to look to the sideline and say, hey, we're going to call a timeout. Didn't do so, and with the clock expiring at 0 and not being able to get a play to where it would either get them closer to kick a field goal, and as it was, they were in field goal range, which could have tied the game and pushed it into overtime. That was not the case as the Bears lose another game. They started off 4-2, and now I believe have lost 6 in a row to where Matt Eberflus was sent packing and a pink slip was in order. And to think, partially I thought was maybe he wanted out of Chicago because he knew that his fate was going to be sealed at the end of the year. But he said, you know what, let me get an early vacation in because I am not going to call a timeout. I am not going to have my quarterback be hung out to dry because I'm sure a lot of the talk was whether or not Caleb Williams should have called a timeout or at least had the mindset to say, hey, what's going on here? But that wasn't the case, as you know. And now Eberflus is gone, and I couldn't even tell you who the interim is. I don't even know if they've hired a guy. So that's what you have with the Bears. But the Lions at 11-1 at the top of the NFC, and as we head into the weekend, you had the Eagles go to Baltimore, and their defense rose to the occasion against that vaunted and high-powered Raven offense and slowed down Lamar Jackson. Derrick Henry, although had a good game on the ground, 19 carries, 82 yards, but certainly not a big factor in the grand scheme of things as Saquon Barkley, that matchup between the 2 running backs, obviously right now tops in the sport where Saquon had that 25-yard touchdown at 14-12 to make it 21-12, and that was pretty much what sealed the deal for the Eagles to win a big game going down the I-95 corridor from Philadelphia to Baltimore. And to me, that was more on Philly because I thought going into that game with Baltimore winning on Monday night in Los Angeles against the Chargers, I felt as if now maybe they're going to get on a little bit of a roll because If they were to beat the Eagles, they have a bye. As I mentioned, one of the final few teams that have byes this coming weekend. And then they could gear up for the final 4 games. But yeah, that was a stinker. And Justin Tucker, 2 more missed field goals, an extra point also missed, and he struggled in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago, if you recall. And you have to wonder whether or not Justin Tucker, the Magic, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer without a doubt. But now you have to wonder whether or not he has snakes in his head because he's not been able to make these kicks. And who knows if that's going to not bode well for he and a Raven team as they get to January and beyond. So for the Ravens, now a game and a half behind Pittsburgh as they made up that game from last week where the Steelers lost that Thursday night in Cleveland, and with the with the Ravens winning at LA against the Chargers, and now that the Steelers won and the Ravens lost, now they have that game and a half lead, really 2 games when you think about it because they do have the head-to-head against the Ravens, as we know. But with the Eagles winning that game, taking it back to the NFC, now Philadelphia could certainly continue to scratch, claw, and try to catch the Lions when it's all said and done, but they're a game behind them. And then the Vikings in the division, NFC North, also had a gut out of game, which they were trailing pretty much from the start. 3-0, they were down as much as 19-6, and then at 22-16, they got the touchdown there late with the extra point to win 23-22 against an Arizona Cardinal team, and they're going to factor into this NFC conversation in a minute. But for the Vikings, again, another big win at home to put the pressure on the Lions, not only at the top of the conference, but even in the division. Now, granted that the Lions do have the head-to-head matchup, beating Minnesota in Minnesota earlier this year, and I believe they do play in Detroit Week 18, the final game of the season. Could it come down to that? Not only for a division, but maybe even for a 1 seed? We'll still have to wait and see. We have plenty of weeks between now and then before we could finalize that. But the Vikings continuing to play well, defensively, Sam Darnold, etc. Kevin O'Connell, I would give him my vote for Coach of the Year. He's done a fantastic job considering that J.J. McCarthy was going to be the starter. And then Sam Darnold had to come in there, and all Darnold has done has led them to an 11-2 record. And kudos to them, or 10-2, excuse me. So kudos to what the Vikings have done. And when we look at those 3 teams, who's going to come out of it when it's all said and done? I think the Lions will win. The Eagles, they have pretty much an easy schedule here down the stretch. They have the Giants. They do have to go to Washington. And then Dallas comes into their building, so they have the 3 division games. And then the other 2 games off the top of my head, I have to go back and check. But considering that the division is weak, even with the Commanders winning yesterday against Tennessee, nothing really to unpack in that game. They finally snapped that 3-game losing streak and that skid that we thought that maybe that the Commanders could start to fade here, as I talked about last Monday. But for the upper ranks of the NFC, I think when it's all said and done, the Lions, as well as the Eagles, they'll be 1-2, where the Vikings, think about it, they could have a record as big as, let's say, 14-3. And they'll be a 5 seed in the NFC. But still, plenty of football to be played. I still think the Lions will prevail when it's all said and done. Could the Eagles overtake them or even the Vikings? Of course they can. But to me, the Vikings would almost have to run the table in order for them to get a 1 seed. And that's going to be hard. Because the Lions, although they have a couple of tricky games, they still have to play the Bears again in Chicago, which may not be easy. We know division road games are always tricky. A date in San Francisco where the Niners, you can forget about it. They flatlined, and Christian McCaffrey could be done for the year with that PCL injury that he suffered in the game last night. So, not to say that that's going to be a cakewalk. Watch that be a game where the Niners are going to rise up for 1 game and upset the apple cart there for the Lions and trying to get that 1 seed. But I think the Lions will prevail. I know the Eagles are going to be hot on their tails, and I would not be surprised if the Eagles do overtake the Lions and get the 1 seed in the conference. But I would think when it's all said and done, unless the Lions have a 2 or 3 game losing streak in front of them, and once we get past next week, we'll go through all the schedules. We'll see what the breakdown is over those final 4 games of the regular season for all the teams that are involved to get that 30,000-foot view of what the home stretch of this NFL season will be like. And then when we look at the other divisions, now I'm going to get to the NFC South because I've talked about the NFC West in the past couple of podcasts over the last few weeks, but the NFC South has now become intriguing because the Atlanta Falcons have fallen flat on their face, where it looked like they were going to cruise to a division title. I believe they were 6-3 at one point. They had all those games, remember, at home. They had 6 of their first 9 in their building, and now things are starting to fall apart there in the ATL. Evidence yesterday where the Chargers went in, close game, nip and tuck, tooth and nail, but the key was at 10-9, where Kirk Cousins, who threw not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 interceptions, including that big one there late in the third quarter. It was a 4th and 5, and Cousins threw an out. And we know Cousins, 35 years of age, certainly doesn't have a rocket arm. Not to say he has a bad arm, but certainly he's not going to throw that pass all the way and deep out to where it was picked off and taken to the house by the Chargers. And that turned from a 10-9 game to a 17-9 game, and then the Chargers were certainly in control at that point. And as a matter of fact, I got that wrong. 10-9, that was, as a matter of fact, I made it 17-10 because they got the 2-point conversion. And even though they tacked on a field goal, but then they had a late pick there by Cousins that sealed the game. And the Falcons now all of a sudden are in a first-place tie with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who also had to fight, scratch, claw against the Carolina Panthers. And give it up to the Panthers, because ever since the injury to Andy Dalton and where they brought back Bryce Young, they've actually been competitive. They've won a couple of games, as you know. They almost beat the Chiefs last week. And then yesterday, they had a shot to push the Buccaneers to the brink to where they could have set themselves up for a game-winning field goal. But Chuba Hubbard, deep in Tampa Bay territory, fumbled the ball. And then Tampa went the other way to kick a game-winning field goal to win 23-20. So they survived that game. And for the Buccaneers to now draw even with the Atlanta Falcons in the NFC South, now you have to wonder whether or not the Buccaneers could actually have the inside track to take over the division. Now, there is a caveat. The Buccaneers did get swept by the Falcons in the regular season. So in order for them to win, they have to be one game better in the standings over the Falcons in order for them to capture another NFC South championship flag. But for right this very second, the Falcons are reeling. You wonder whether or not they're going to rally the troops to have a game Monday night in Vegas. And the Vegas team, which we'll get to in a second, they're also in a free fall, but have played hard, played pretty spunky as of late. And the Black Friday game, which I'll get to with the Chiefs. But for the NFC South, now that's become a toss-up, even though there is an advantage there for the Falcons to win based on the tiebreaker over Tampa. And then the NFC West. I've talked about the Wild Wild West for quite some time here. And think about this. 3 weeks ago, you had the Seattle Seahawks, who were 4-5, a team that looked like they were going to be out to pasture, losing tough games in the division, Rams earlier this year against the Niners, and then you wondered whether or not that they were going to get out of their own way to see if they could find their way in an NFC West that had become a logjam. And a lot of that had to do with the Cardinals playing well to where they were in first place over the last couple of weeks, and dare I even say, could have been the team to beat there in the division. Well, you can scratch that because Seattle is now overtaking the division to where they have sole possession of first place. That's right, sole possession. 4-5, they won 3 straight games, a huge game in San Francisco, as you know. And then yesterday, cap it off with a trip east to play the Jets. And they were down 14-0 and even 21-7 to where one-time Jet Leonard Williams, deep in their own territory, to where Aaron Rodgers had to rush a throw, was tipped and picked off by Leonard Williams, who rushed up the sidelines 92 yards, which is the longest interception return by a defensive lineman in NFL history. And that made it 21-13. They missed the extra point, but then they chipped away, and they ended up winning the game 26-21. Just a fantastic job by the Seahawks. Now, here's the thing. Now that they've gotten a little gas in their tank, watch them all of a sudden just fall flat, as we've seen the Seahawks do in the past. And I don't want to throw a hex or a jinx on them, but this is how the Seahawks team has been. Very erratic, very up and down, led by their quarterback, Geno Smith. They do have weapons there on offense. We know the cast of characters, the DK Metcalfs, the Kenneth Walkers, as well as Tyler Lockett. But for whatever the reason, when you expect them to do well, that's when they all of a sudden turn on a dime. And when you expect them to be, they're not going to win this game, or there's no chance, Seahawks are dead, all of a sudden they rise from the ashes, and now here they are, tops in the NFC West. And with the Cardinals, as I mentioned, losing a tough game in Minnesota, where they led pretty much from the start, and that would have been a big win for a Cardinal team, knowing that they could have kept pace with the Seahawks, and not only that, but also got a better feeling considering that they've stubbed their toe here. The Cardinals, where they've lost 2 in a row, and now they've lost 3 in a row to the point where they're at 500, and now looking up in the division, and with the Rams winning a game in New Orleans, but they're still a game under 500, I believe. Let me take a look at the standings here. I believe they're 5-6 as currently constituted, as I'll take a peek here real quick. But the Rams won in New Orleans. No big whip there because the Rams, they had to get back on the beam there. Yes, with that win, they're 6-6, so my apologies there. They were 5-6 coming into the game, so now they're at 500. And with the Rams winning that game and with the 49ers, and we understand that they have been decimated by injuries. No excuses. You have to throw the guys out there that are going to suit up and play. But when you think back on the season, all you have to do is look back to Christian McCaffrey, because a lot of people thought with that calf injury going into week 1 against the Jets that it was weird how that all unfolded, because he wasn't on the injury report. Then last minute was on the injury report that it was just going to be week to week. Well, he was out pretty much the first half of the year, and then as he came back, didn't really show the Christian McCaffrey of last year, or even of old for that matter. And now hitting the Highmark Stadium, Buffalo turf, to the point where he tried to make a cut on a pitch and he just went right to the ground as the snow was falling there at Orchard Park. Beautiful setting there to watch if you saw the game, but not beautiful to watch if you're a Niner fan, because with McCaffrey going down and with Ayuk going down early this year, the wide receiver got the big payday, and injuries to Deebo Samuel's been in and out of the lineup, as well as George Kittle, Brock Purdy, who didn't play last week, and it's just been an absolute mess. Sandwiched in those losses, Green Bay, and then now with the loss in Buffalo, could pretty much put the Niners out the pasture. As I talked about last week, I thought they were done. There was no way they're going to make the playoffs, and they still have a couple of division games where the Rams are coming into their building. They also have to play in Arizona, which is not going to be easy for them. And with them being a mass unit, I don't think they're going to be able to piece it together in order for them to make a playoff run. But it is the NFC West. We could see Seattle come back to the pack. We could see Arizona playing a little bit better. And then who knows, as the horse that's up the track right now, would you be shocked that somehow, some way, even with all the injuries, will the San Francisco 49ers all of a sudden start coming up the track as you get deeper into the season and maybe, just maybe, somehow overtake everybody in the division? It's going to be tricky because right now the division record is 1-3, and that was another reason why I didn't think they were going to make the postseason. Now as you get to the AFC and turn it around there, we could talk about the Chiefs who are blue in the face, people. I know they win these games. I don't even know what it is. Maybe there's a horseshoe in the bowels of Arrowhead Stadium, or maybe they sage the place, or even their locker rooms when they're on the road. But think about their recent stretch of games to where they've just been, I'm going to say it, they've been flat out lucky and fortunate. Because you have to have a little bit of that, especially when you're going for a three-peat the way the Chiefs are. Because even with the loss in Buffalo that they suffered there a few weeks ago, but whether it was the Tampa game on Monday night where they should have gone for 2 to win the game and they didn't, and they won in overtime against the Buccaneers, or the game against Denver when they actually had a chance to lose that game, but Denver blocked the field goal, Kansas City blocked the field goal attempt by the Broncos in order for them to win that game. Then sandwiched with the loss against the Bills in Buffalo. Then you had the game against Carolina where they had to win by the hairs of their chinny chin chin, where they led, and then Bryce Young comes down the field. They punch it in the end zone, get a 2-point conversion, then lose in overtime. The Panthers, that is, and where the Chiefs were able to sweat out that victory. And then on Black Friday, when they had a 16-3 lead, the Raiders, and Aiden O'Connell actually played pretty well, came roaring back, took a 17-16 lead. All right, they tacked on a field goal, but then the Raiders actually had opportunities to kick a go-ahead field goal and even a game-winning field goal, to where they had a botched snap there late in the game in the closing seconds, to where they recovered the fumble, and that could have been a situation where the Raiders would have been able to steal a game at Arrowhead, but that wasn't the case, as the Chiefs continue to skate by on thin ice and win these games. And the first thing I think about when I look at the stretch, yes, you could call them lucky, you could call them fortunate, you could call them champions, you could call them with their toughness, their mettle, etc. But I don't know if this is going to be able to last to the point where if I'm a Chief fan, I'd be really concerned. And yes, we could talk about the track record. Yes, we could talk about the ways that they win these games. And we could talk about how Patrick Mahomes, even at 11-1, is playing nowhere near at an MVP level. So yes, you do count your blessings. But to me, and I don't want to make a comparison to this team because that team collapsed badly. And I won't think that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to collapse the way the Philadelphia Eagles did of last year. But think about it. The Eagles won games similar to where the Chiefs have won these games this year. Whether it was, if you think about it, how the Eagles won against Buffalo in their building. And even a game, ironically, in Kansas City on a Monday night where Marquez Valdes-Scantling dropped the ball that if he caught it and would have walked into the end zone, the Eagles would have lost that game. Similar to the Bills game where Josh Allen threw a ball to Gabe Davis where Gabe Davis ran a wrong route, where if he ran a right route, he would have caught it and the game would have been over. Instead, they kicked a field goal to take the lead, and then Jake Elliott tied it in regulation, and then they won in overtime. So I had my sequences all mixed up. But because of how those games went down, and remember the Eagles were 10-1, what happened? They collapsed the rest of the season and then lost on the road in Tampa in the wild card round to where questions were abound with the coach, quarterback, etc. But this is how I'm looking at this Chief team. I don't think they're going to collapse in that regard, but I will say this. This is not sustainable. They're going to lose a game or two along the way. I don't think they're going to run the table the rest of the regular season, although the schedule is not strong to begin with. Yes, they do have games against the Texans in their building and have to go to Pittsburgh on Christmas. But how I look at it is, this Chief team, they are ripe for the picking. But the thing is, the opposition has not picked them yet. So that's one thing that I'm going to look at here, despite the fact of everything that's transpired over the last almost 3 years with this Chief team, winning Super Bowls, winning big games, winning games ugly, winning games late, sweating out these games no matter what. But I would have to look at this as a telltale warning that this may not bode well for the Chiefs down the road. So I'll leave it at that. Buffalo continues to roll. As I mentioned the game last night, so they're the 2 seed in the conference as we know. Steelers, I'll talk about them right now. Got down on a 7-0 lead thanks to a pick 6 there by Cam Taylor-Britt. And they were back and forth in that first half to where whatever the Bengals did, the Steelers answered back with touchdowns. They got a break there with a fumble recovery. Who else? TJ Watt, where they kicked the field goal and had 27 points in the first half for a Steelers team, which was just mind-blowing. But Russell Wilson, in sync with this ball club, threw for over 400 yards, was 28 for 39, or I think 29 for 38. Had a monster game after that pick 6, and the Steelers defense was not good. The Bengal offense had their way. Joey Porter Jr. had a nightmare, had flags thrown at him left and right, pass interferences, defensive holdings, just a terrible game. Hopefully he could get that out of his system because he was just god-awful on that Paycor Stadium field. But the offense was potent. The offense was just able to move the ball at will, and they got some breaks there as well. At 34-24, the biggest play where Joe Burrow got sacked, stripped there. Nick Herbig came around the edge, and Peyton Wilson, the rookie, ran it into the end zone to make it 41-24. Although the Steelers had to hang on late, it was 44-38, where the Bengals answered with a couple of touchdowns. And even though the Bengals were out of timeouts, all the Steelers had to do was get a first down, and they did so, where Justin Fields turned the corner on a 3rd and 4. And that was your ball game. Now the Steelers, as I mentioned earlier, made up a game on the Ravens there in the division, but they're 9-3 there. It's a 3 seed. Houston beats Jacksonville yesterday. Now the big play there was Trevor Lawrence gets knocked out of the game by, I believe it was Ali. I can't pronounce these names, people, so my apologies. But Al-Shaair. And he knocked him out of the game. You had a scrum there, which ensued. And for the Texans, who were able to squeak by in that game, and Mac Jones actually had a decent game. But the Texans, who have not played well here over the last few weeks, get a win, and a big win indeed that they needed, because the Colts, who were in Foxborough, and even though they swept the Colts earlier this year, so they have that tiebreaker edge on them, but the Colts won in Foxborough to where they got a late touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tack on there in the final seconds to secure the win to kind of keep themselves not only in pace for the division, but even for a wild card there at the bottom of the AFC playoff picture. So for Trevor Lawrence, I think he's going to be out for, you would think, a considerable amount of time. That was a vicious hit that he took there by Al-Shaair. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. First name, I believe it's, let me make sure I get this right, people, because Lord knows I screw up these names. So let me pull this up here quickly. Yeah, and he actually apologized. Yes, Aziz Al-Shaair. So for the hit on Lawrence, and then Evan Ingram came to the rescue, and there was a big giant scrum there. So I'm sure he's going to get, if not fined for sure, but probably suspended, but sends an apology to the Jaguar quarterback. But that's what you have there with the top four in the conference there between Kansas City, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, as well as the Houston Texans. And then you also have a deal where in the conference, we talked about Baltimore, Chargers winning yesterday, as we know, and then Denver, who will play tonight against Cleveland. That's going to round out your AFC playoff picture, because right now, as we look at it here, and next week I'll really unpack schedules and break it all down, but here's what we have to date. NFC, as constituted, Detroit, Philly, Seattle, Atlanta are your top four seeds. Minnesota, Green Bay, Washington. Now, right now, at the moment, Tampa is the 8th seed, followed by Cardinals and Rams, and they're all at 6-6. They're 2 games behind Washington. So to me, it's either going to be division or bust if you're LA, the Rams that is, Arizona, or Tampa Bay, as I discussed earlier. And then as far as the AFC goes, Kansas City, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Houston, followed by the Chargers, Ravens, Baltimore. Now that could change because with the Ravens having the bye this weekend, and if the Chargers lose this weekend, remember, Ravens have a tiebreaker. So if it so happens that the Chargers lose, they'll be tied with the Ravens, but the Ravens will have the advantage to where they'll get the 5 seed. And that's one race you'll have to look at there. And then you have Denver, followed by Indianapolis. Miami, forget about, because Thanksgiving night, Miami had a shot there to at least show the world that they can win, not only on the road against a big team, but also in cold weather. But when you muff a punt there to start the game after Green Bay goes 3 and out, and then they punch it into the end zone, and then at 21-3, they try to answer back, get closer. They made it 27-11, and they were about to go in on a 4th and goal where they could have cut it to 1 score, but they got stuffed there, and that was your game. Miami, they're not going to do anything as far as the playoffs. But when it comes to the wild card, both in the AFC and NFC, after that 7 seed, especially if Denver wins tonight, you got nothing. Because those teams that are going to be trailing are going to be 2 games behind in the conference. So unless there's going to be a collapse by Denver or Washington or teams like that, your top 7 could already be set in both conferences before you even get to start making some eggnog and wrapping some Christmas gifts. And that's not going to be good for the NFL, because we know as crazy topsy-turvy as the NFL has been, to not have any of these teams sneaking through the back door or make a rush for, let's say, a 6 or 7 seed in the conference. Yes, we could talk about divisions where it's the the NFC South or the NFC West, as I discussed. But other than that, you really don't have a lot to chew on here when it comes to a wild card race or teams that could be moving up and trying to get themselves in position to get a 6 or 7 seed. You just don't have it. Especially if Denver wins tonight, which they should against Cleveland in the Mile High City. Other than that, that's what you have at the NFL, people. There isn't anything else to really unpack or discuss when it comes to what is happening with the National Football League. And one thing I will throw in, Daniel Jones, who got cut by the Giants last week, and because I didn't have a podcast, mutually agreed, goodbye. He signed with the Minnesota Vikings, which I think would bode well considering Kevin O'Connell and what he's done with Sam Darnold. So I'm sure a lot of reps there for one Daniel Jones to see if he could be a guy that maybe could step in if Darnold does get hurt here down the stretch of the season. We know Jones does have ability. Now, is he great? No. Is he good? Maybe not. But he's a guy that has shown and had flashes where it was 2 years ago taking the Giants team to the playoffs, winning a playoff game in, ironically, Minnesota. So it's not as if he's completely useless. Although he's shown that there with the Giants this year, but that just goes to show you it may not be all his fault, considering that the Giants lose in Dallas there on Thanksgiving, as you know, and not really anything to discuss there. But any other games of yesterday that I can really get into before I move on to college, which that obviously is very intriguing. There really isn't anything else to discuss. What do you have? Talked about the Black Friday game. Yeah, all the games. Tennessee, Washington, I wasn't going to get into that. Yeah, everything else has been uncovered. So now let me turn my attention to the college ranks. And boy, was it a crazy weekend, to say the least. And as much as I want to start off with Georgia, and they are a huge story, because if they would have lost that game against Georgia Tech, who knows where they would have stood here with the committee tomorrow night, as they'll have their latest, we'll have the rankings, but the latest grouping of the top 12 that will qualify for the playoff, which will begin 2 weeks from this coming Friday. Now, I'll put Georgia on the back burner for now, because the story of the weekend was not only what happened in Columbus, but also what happened right upstate from where I live in Syracuse, New York. But I'm going to start off with Ohio State and Michigan. And that was a game that you knew that since Ohio State didn't get off to a good start and let Michigan hang around, and that was a game where the Wolverines knew that they had Ohio State right where they wanted. And even without a couple of key guys in their lineup, Colston, the tight end who didn't play in the game, as well as the defensive back, and for Ryan Day, the coach, and I get it that Will Howard has ability, but did not have a good game either. Got the touchdown, but threw 2 interceptions. And for Ohio State, inexplicable to lose a game. And going into that matchup on Saturday in Columbus, even Ryan Day knew that they had as good as an opportunity to win this game, considering they were a far cry from their championship selves a year ago, how they had already lost 3 in a row in this series to the Wolverines. Granted that it was J.J. McCarthy and for the most part, obviously the head coach there, Jim Harbaugh. But when they just lay a complete deuce at midfield, knowing that they had an opportunity, if they would have won this game, they would have played in the Big Ten Championship and would have had an opportunity to go up against Oregon yet again. But they spit the bit, just a loss that you can't even fathom. And even though I think that they're going to make it in the top 12, the selection committee is going to look at that and say, all right, one of their losses was to Oregon. Now, this last one was a bad one, albeit against a bitter rival. But I think when it's all said and done, they're going to be in the bottom rung of that top 12. Now, would I be shocked if they're out? I'll have to say yes, only because, granted that the schedule was a cakewalk, but they did beat Indiana, and not that Indiana's a powerhouse by any means. And also Penn State along the way, where Penn State now is going to play Ohio State. Penn State, I'm sorry, they're going to play Oregon in the Big Ten Conference. And I'm going to talk more about that game on Thursday. But because of those 2 wins that they had, one being in Happy Valley and the other at home against Indiana, that's where they're going to make it, despite the fact that the conference is an abomination. And I don't care how you slice it. Oh, Jay Reels, come on. Penn State's been great all year. Look at that. They're ranked now number 3 in the country. And you can't knock Indiana for what they've done. And Michigan, come on, it's a bit of rival. The conference is garbage. I don't care how you slice it. I don't care how you feed it to me. Because overall, there's no way they should have lost that game on Saturday, Ohio State. But that's why I think the selection committee, they're going to pick them to get into the final 12. Although, who knows where they're going to rank them. It's going to probably be 9 through 12. I don't think they're going to have a home game. I'd be a little bit surprised right now. But who knows? Maybe because of the teams that they played and the competition that they beat, maybe they'll be a 9. I don't know. We'll wait to see tomorrow night. But that was just as bad as of a loss as you possibly get. Oh, no, wait. That wasn't as bad of a loss. The other team that just made you pull your hair out of your head, especially if you're Michael Irvin, Ray Lewis, Clinton Portis, go on down the list, Edgerrin James, the alum of the university as known as the U of Miami. How they lost that game in the Carrier Dome up in Syracuse on Saturday is even more of one that you can't even comprehend. If you thought the Ohio State Michigan loss was bad, be it in their building, what the hell happened to Miami there on Saturday? Now, I got to shout out my guy, Robert Pena, his son Trevor, who is a wide receiver / kick returner, running back. He's a Swiss Army knife who plays for the team and actually had the game-tying touchdown where the Hurricanes rushed out to a 21-0 lead. And then the Orange came all the way back to where they tied the game. The aforementioned Trevor Pena, number 2, who got the game-tying touchdown score. And then you can't knock the offense. They put up 38 points in the game. But the Hurricane defense, what happened? They thought that this was going to be a picnic. They thought this was going to be a cakewalk to where, we're going to play in the ACC final and then steal that game so we could have a bye and see what's going to transpire here in the opening round of the college football playoff, as I mentioned, 2 weeks from this coming Friday, and then the following week, see who the Hurricane's going to play. Well, I got news for you. Even with that just downright pathetic performance defensively and Syracuse winning, forget about the selection committee. This is yours truly here. They are not making the Final 12. Why would they? They're not playing in the ACC final. That's Clemson and SMU. And Clemson actually lost to South Carolina in their building. South Carolina went to Clemson and won on a last-second touchdown. And South Carolina, big-time year for them. You could even argue whether or not they should belong in the top 12. But, of course, I don't think they will. But considering the competition and who they've beaten along the way. But for Miami, you had a golden opportunity, 21-0, and they took the pedal off the metal to the point where they came storming back and they win the game. And now, forget about being on the outside looking in. You're going to have a ball game, no doubt. But everything that had transpired, the big-time start that you had where you went undefeated. All right, you lost to Georgia Tech. Tough loss. Fine. You got back on the beam. All right, you beat the dregs of teams along the way up until Saturday. And then Syracuse, who's played well this year, I believe their record is 9-3, or they were 8-3 going into the game, 4-3 in the conference. But you lose that game, and now you lose all privilege to even qualify for the Final 12. That is as bad of a loss as you could possibly get. And as I mentioned last week, and I'll say it one more time, I certainly looked like a fool about 5-6 weeks ago saying that the regular season has been ruined because of the playoff, because you thought that a lot of teams that were going to have no wins, one win. And I don't know, maybe teams probably looked at it, not to say that they have this idea that, we can afford to lose a game or two and still make it into the college football playoff. I don't think they want to go in with that type of attitude. But considering the way college football has been played over the years, you've had a lot of teams that have made, granted it's just the top 4 with no losses or one loss, that you would think, all right, we can afford to lose a game or two. I have a slip up here, slip up there. We'll still make it the college football playoff, which to me, I thought halfway through the season was a detriment, because a lot of the teams that we thought were going to rise to the top and have, let's say, no loss or one loss or tops 2 losses, you have a lot of teams here that are going to have 2 losses and maybe almost a third, although it's moot now where Texas A&M lost to Texas, where if they would have beaten Texas, they would have played Georgia in the SEC championship and had a chance to beat Georgia, where they would have won the conference and would have made it as a bye team with a 3-loss ledger on their record. That's how crazy this college football season has been. And by the way, Georgia. At home against Georgia Tech, as I mentioned, beating Miami earlier in the year. What happened? Down 17-0 first half. You think to yourself, this Georgia team, they're Jekyll and Hyde. We saw first half against Florida. Yes, we saw the losses along the way, whether it was Ole Miss, Alabama, when they were down, 30-7 at one point. Came all the way back before losing late. And here they were, 17-0. Although in their building. And now they had to come storming all the way back to the point where Georgia, it looked like they were going to be done. Curtains, 27-13. You thought to yourself, all right, fourth quarter, they scored a touchdown there with about 5.5 to go, 27-20. And give kudos to Haynes King, who had a big game, not only in the air but on the ground. But the costly turnover, 3rd and 1 at their, I believe, 31-yard line, tried to get the ball across, fumbled it to get a first down and move the chains. Recovered by Georgia. They punched it into the end zone, tied at 27. And then it took not 1, not 2, not 4, not 6, but 8 overtimes in order for the Bulldogs to prevail. And if that's not a signature win, now I understand you can talk about them beating Texas in Texas the way they did. and even Tennessee for that matter. But this one right now, this deep, this late in the year, considering that they were on the brink. They were not only down and shut out in the first half, they were down in the fourth quarter by 2 touchdowns. They got that to 1 score, the fumble, the recovery, the touchdown, and then all the overtimes. If this isn't a telltale sign of a Georgia team that could be, not saying that they are, could be the team to beat as we get into December and January, let's see what's going to happen. Now, they're going to have an SEC final against Texas, the aforementioned game down in Austin to where Georgia blew the doors off of them. Their defense was just phenomenal. They had a big lead. They won 30-15, and there was no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it that Georgia was the best team, not only on the field that day, but maybe even in the country, considering that Texas was number 1. And for Georgia, now Carson Beck had a big game through 5 TDs. Now, I understand a lot of that was the overtime, of course, so you have to take that into account. But if Beck is going to play like that, more so second half than he did first, and for Georgia, we know that if their defense rises to the occasion, they could beat anybody. And I think Georgia's going to be dangerous here. Now, would I be shocked if they lose against Texas? I wouldn't, because I'm sure Texas, they're going to ready for some revenge here, although the game, as we know, is going to be in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, pretty much a home game for the Georgia Bulldogs down there in the ATL. But as I look at it, and we'll talk more about those games and the conference championships and the whole college football playoff scenario there on Thursday, but Georgia, to me, I think this win could propel them deep into January and maybe to a national championship game. Because if they're not going to hang on the heels and really look at what happened there Saturday night, where they were walking the plank and they could have been done. And it could have been a scenario where the Bulldogs, now they still would have played in a conference championship, but that would have been looked a little bit different, even if they would have beaten Texas. And obviously, if they win the SEC, they would have gone on to the playoff anyway. But a lot of people would have questioned whether or not Georgia even belonged in the conference championship game if they were lost to Georgia Tech. So that's how crazy the weekend was there. Let me see if there's anything else I need to discuss. No, that's pretty much it. A lot of drama, lots to unpack there with the college football, and who knows what's going to happen here with these conference championships, which we'll talk about a lot more come Thursday when we reconvene at that time. And as we go through the rankings, yes, real quick. Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, those are your top 4. Now, of course, Notre Dame, they may get a bye as a 5th seed. As of right now, the top 4 is probably going to be, even with the loss there by Ohio State, it's going to be Oregon, Texas, SMU, Boise State. Now, SMU is going to leapfrog over Miami, who had that spot there previously, and then Boise. Those are going to be a top 4 there, where the at-large other seed will go to the Fighting Irish. But again, Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia are your top 5. Georgia's not going to overtake Texas, even though Georgia has beaten Texas. But remember, Texas has 1 loss, Georgia has 2. Tennessee, Ohio State, SMU, Indiana round out the... Oh, and Boise round out the top 10, followed by Alabama and Arizona State. Now, can Alabama get in with 3 losses? Let's see what the selection committee is going to choose here. With Miami dropping, South Carolina, I think I would give them a little bit, maybe more of an opportunity to crack the top 12. I understand Alabama is Alabama, but it's going to be fascinating to see. And even Arizona State, and the way they played, they've been phenomenal here, beating BYU here as early as 10 days ago. But let's see. Watch my YouTube channel, @JReels. Tomorrow night, we'll we'll do an undertaking of what the committee has looked at as far as the college playoff scenario. And of course, we'll encapsulate it all there come Thursday, as I mentioned. All right, now let me turn my attention to the association as I lace up the high tops. And NBA, as we get to now December, and I know the NBA Cup, I believe, isn't that this weekend? Or maybe it's early next week. That just goes to show you how much I care about the NBA Cup. But I know this is the last full week forthcoming, and I believe the games will be next week. If I'm not mistaken, it could be next Monday or Tuesday. I'll pull that up right now just because. But as you've listened over the last month, I have not been in tune, nor have I even cared about the NBA Cup, because when it's all said and done, yes, a banner will be raised disgracefully, hopefully by a team that has not won a championship. And I know one of the teams has punched their ticket, if I'm not mistaken. Has it been the Hawks? Because I know the Hawks beat the Cavaliers in back-to-back games this week. And I'll get to the Cavs in a second. Yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, and even into Saturday. Is that right? Oh, no game scheduled. So, right. Tuesday and Wednesday, you'll have the start of the quarterfinal. Then you'll have the semifinal there on Saturday, and I believe the final will be there Sunday or maybe Monday, as it looks like right now. I'm just looking at the schedule for the following week. But one more time, people, I'm not going to waste my breath discussing that. But with the NBA, had a couple of big key pieces come back as far as injuries are concerned. Luka Doncic, who came back, played yesterday against Portland. I forgot what he did there. Let me see if I can pull up a score and they see what they did last night against the Portland Trailblazers in a win. So for Luka, didn't miss a beat. He only had 36 points and 13 assists in his return from that wrist injury as they beat the Portland Trailblazers out in Portland last night. And then you had Kristaps Porzingis come back last week against the Clippers, chipped in with 16 points. Actually had a good offensive performance last night against the Cavaliers, which I'll get to in a second. But without Jaylen Brown, who had an illness, nursing that hip injury that he suffered a few weeks back, as well as Derek White, who is nursing a foot injury in his own right, the Celtics lost to the Cavaliers in a rematch. Remember, they played about 2 weeks ago to where the Celtics won and snapped that 15-0 start. But after the two losses to the Hawks, they were able to get back on the beam. And the Celtics, to me, that was a bad loss. They had a 12-point lead going into the fourth quarter, pretty much had everything in order, but for the defense to just fall apart to where they gave up 43 points in the fourth quarter, inexplicable of a Celtic defense. And I know you don't have two key pieces, no excuse there in a one, Jaylen Brown and Derek White, but they did not answer the bell in the fourth quarter to where the Cavs overtook them. And even though the Celtics tried to keep it close there toward the end, but they were able to prevail. Cavaliers, can you say that they are the best team? Obviously, by record they are, but we've talked about this last week. And this is going to be a theme here over the course of these next few months, heading into the latter part of the year, especially once you get past the Super Bowl, when we get into that first Sports Dead Zone, part one. And let's see if the Cavaliers are going to have staying power, if they're going to be a team that's going to have legs deep into this season to where they're going to be battling it out with the Celtics for that top seed, or will they slip a little bit and kind of be in that 2-3 range from whenever they happen to start to come back to the pack there a little bit. So that's one to keep in mind there, as the Cavaliers still have been formidable even with the hiccup there to Atlanta last week. Other than that, with the association, some surprises. Remember last week we talked about how Tyrese Maxey came out to Joel Embiid, talked about how he was a guy that is late for everything and called out the star player of the Sixers. Well, I wonder if that has all of a sudden trickled down to other franchises in the NBA, because you've had a couple of instances where Anthony Edwards had enough in a performance against Sacramento last week to where he called his team soft and a bunch of front runners. Now, the T-Wolves have certainly not gotten out of the gate the way they did last year, where they were at the top of the Western Conference, hovering with the OKCs and the Denvers of the world. And even though Minnesota did make it to a conference final, as we know, last year, but with the trade late, Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo coming to Minnesota and sending the long-tenured Karl Anthony Towns, I was going to say Anthony Karl Towns, the AKA known as Cat, to have that trade late in training camp, and how that's translated for the T-Wolves has not been good here at the start, considering that they're on the outside of the top 10 in the Western Conference looking in. They're currently 9-10, and for Edwards to call out the team, wondering whether or not Chris Finch, he's going to have a pulse on his team to make sure that they get back on the beam here as we're approaching the first quarter of the NBA season. And then you had Dejounte Murray of the New Orleans Pelicans do the same with his team, and he just got there. If you recall, he was traded in the offseason from Atlanta to New Orleans, but he also did the same where Toronto came into their building, and Toronto was winless on the road, actually had a 34-point lead in the game at one point before going away with a victory, and he also called out his team saying that the effort was just, quote, disgusting. So New Orleans, a team where Zion coming in 20 pounds or 25 pounds below weight, and him having another issue with his hamstring, out indefinitely. Who knows when they're going to come back. And a Pelicans team where they can't get out of their own way, even with some big pieces in their lineup who obviously cannot stay healthy and try to make a run there in the Western Conference. And if you're a Pelican fan, I'm sure you have to be just flat out disgusted in your own right, taking the words out of your two-guard. But for the Pelicans, who right now are in the midst of an 8-game losing streak, no Zion to be found, Brandon Ingram, what's happening with him? And if you're Willie Green, you have to wonder whether or not your job is in jeopardy, although it's not your fault. But the Pelicans right now are at the bottom of the Western Conference at 4-17. Now, granted, you're just a half game behind the Utah Jazz, who are 4-16, but that is a place that I'm sure a lot of Pelicans fans who had a lot of hope and a lot of thought of maybe a team that could be a surprise, considering that the Western Conference is loaded with the OKCs, with the aforementioned teams that I mentioned that aren't even at the top when you think about it. Whether your name is Denver, the Lakers have skidded here a little bit, Dallas, Golden State has come back to the pack. Even Memphis has now made a leap here. Look out for Memphis as they've won 6 in a row. The Rockets, yes, no, not the Akeem Olajuwon, Robert Horry, Clyde Drexler, Vernon Maxwell led. No, not those teams of 30 years ago. This team with Ime Udoka as the head coach, with Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green and guys like that who have all of a sudden put themselves in a position where they're ranked number 2 in the Western Conference, just a half game behind the Oklahoma City Thunder, that Rocket team. And we talked about this in the NBA preseason preview that I had as far as a team that could be one that maybe could be a surprise. Maybe that could flirt with one of the top, I wasn't going to think 2 or 3 seeds, but maybe somewhere in the middle of the pack. And what they've done so far has just been astronomical. So let's see if they can continue their success. And of course, they have some veteran leadership led by Dylan Brooks, as we know. I know he's a pain in the neck and a pest, a hard guy to root for, but he does bring a little bit of edge and also experience, considering he played on those Memphis teams of years past. So we'll have to wait and see what is going to transpire there in H-Town. But besides that, with the association, as I'll break it down here a little bit, talk about the Cavs, Celtics. Give it up for the Magic. They've played well here. Winners are 6 in a row. Don't look now, but the Bucks have gotten out of their early season doldrums. They've won 6 in a row and now are in the top 6, currently ranked 5th. Now at 10-9, so you have to keep an eye out for the Bucks here as they make their ascent in the Eastern Conference. The Wizards, 2-16. They've lost 14 in a row. I just had to bring that up because their losing streak is out of control. Talked about what's happening out west with the Rockets and Grizzlies, led by the Thunder there. And the Warriors have now lost 4 in a row. They've come back to the pack big time after their torrid start. Lakers there, ranked 6th, just ahead of the Clippers on the outside looking in of that top 6. Phoenix, who got Kevin Durant back, but after their great start, what were they, 9-2, and now they are 2-6 in their last 8. 3-7 overall, so you got to keep that in mind there. Denver, they're in the bottom rung of that 7-10 range. Sacramento, very disappointing. I thought they'd be better than 9-12 to start off their year, even though you had the situation where the T-Wolves, Anthony Edwards, had to come out against Sacramento, against his team against Sacramento as the Kings won. But that's what you have there with the association. I want to flip it real quick with the college game. Just on a couple of notes. College basketball has begun, people. And even though it's not going to be part of our consciousness until we get deeper into the month and especially into January. And once we get past the NFL playoffs and, of course, the Super Bowl, obviously it'll be front and center. But I just want to point out a couple of things. One, UConn. Maui Classic, they lost a couple of games there last week, including one to Memphis and Penny Hardaway, to where they fought back from a big deficit, came back, but lost that first game. And in the process of that Maui Classic, there was a controversial call there at the end. Danny Hurley, who, listen, he's won back-to-back titles, and even though he's come back for a third, didn't take the Laker job, as you know, but with already 3 losses in his back pocket and already griping at the refs and the officials, and he can be very demonstrative and a guy that could be even hard to root for, despite the fact that his pedigree recently, winning back-to-back titles, which we haven't seen since Billy Donovan did it with the Florida Gators in the 06-07 years. But for he to just kind of fly off the handle, and we've seen that plenty of times here throughout this run, that could get tiresome despite the fact that he's won 2 championships in a row and looking for a third. But with them not only losing to Memphis, but also losing to Dayton in the process before winning against Maryland Eastern. Who? What? Maryland Eastern? Yes. So even though they had the 2 losses there and a team that has big-time aspirations to do something that hasn't been done in eons. I think you got to go back to the John Wooden teams who won all those championships at UCLA back in the late 60s into the 70s. But for UConn, I just wanted to say 5-3 start, slow start for them, losing 3 straight. I had to bring that up considering what they've done here over the last couple of years. And then on a sad note, Saturday night, Lou Carnesecca, the famed St. John's coach dating back to the 70s and 80s, a big, and I mean a big part of the Big East, the way it was formed, especially in the early 80s, when you think about the days of the Big East with them against Georgetown, the big rivals, of course, St. John's, Syracuse, Lou with all the sweaters, even mocking at one point, playfully, John Thompson with the towel over his right shoulder or left shoulder for that matter, and being a staple in the Big East to where it was a powerhouse, the best conference in the land, where you had Syracuse, St. John's, Georgetown, UConn, Villanova. That was Big East basketball. Now you have all these other teams in the mix. Of course, you don't even have Syracuse a part of the Big East. They have been long gone, as you know. But for Lou Carnesecca, who is about 6 weeks shy of cracking 100. That's right, turning a golden times 2. 100 years old, died at the age of 99 in a hospital surrounded by family and friends. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Carnesecca family, to the St. John's family as well. He was one that, and I watched St. John's during that time, watching the Big East, watching St. John's, Georgetown in a Final Four. And Georgetown beating St. John's. Even St. John's winning in the Capitol Center down in Landover. On a Saturday afternoon, when they beat Georgetown, they were ranked number 1 in the country. That's how big St. John's was in the Big East at that time. So kudos and the transition for Lou Carnesecca. Moving on. Thoughts, prayers, and condolences once again to his family. All right, now let me lace up the skates and take a trip around the ice, what we have here in the National Hockey League. And when I look at the standings, there's a big surprise there, not only at the top of the Metropolitan, but at the top of the East overall. And that is the Washington Capitals. Yes, that Capital team, if you recall, has not had a one Alexander Ovechkin in the lineup due to the fractured fibia that he has. And who knows, he's probably going to be out for another 2 weeks minimum, maybe another month. But for the Capitals, where has this come? How has this come about? And mind you, at 17-6-1, 35 points, a point ahead of the Devils, 2 points ahead of the Hurricanes, so it's certainly highly contested there. And in the Atlantic, in the other division in the Eastern Conference, you have Florida, a point ahead of the Maple Leafs, and the Maple Leafs welcoming with open arms Austin Matthews after him being out for almost a month with that upper body injury and recorded an assist against the Tampa Bay Lightning there on Saturday night. But for the Capitals, who all of a sudden, 4 in a row, hot as a pistol, and here they are, top point total in the Eastern Conference, and without Ovechkin. And think about this, even with this 4-game winning streak, They had one of the bigger blunders, one of the bigger bloopers that you'll ever see in a million years, thanks to Charlie Lindgren, their goaltender, where on Wednesday night had a puck behind the net. I believe it was against Tampa, and as a matter of fact, he came behind the net and he was corralling it to where he was in front of his own crease, and he meant to swipe it around the roulette wheel around the backboards. And what did he do? He hit it into his own net. As bad as you could possibly see a goaltender muff and just completely embarrass him on that play. But guess what? It didn't even faze the goaltender, didn't even faze the Capitals. They were able to win the game, and they have just done a phenomenal job. And you wonder whether or not the Capitals are going to have any legs to continue this, in which is going to be a very competitive Metropolitan Division. Now, the Rangers have just been awful for them. They got off to that great start, and now the Rangers are kind of floundering here. They're at 13-9-1. They're actually now 8 points behind the Capitals in the division. As I mentioned, the aforementioned Devils and Hurricanes nipping in the heels. But the Rangers have not played well. The rest of the division pretty much the same, whether they're the Flyers, although they beat the Rangers there the day after Thanksgiving. The Blue Jackets, who've been a bit of a surprise and played well here as of late, but nobody expects them to do well. The Islanders have just been terrible. A bunch of overtime losses left and right, blowing leads at 9, 10, and 6. Just an eyesore of a record. And the Penguins, think about this. Even with the Islander record the way it is, the Penguins are in last place, although tied point total with the Islanders. And when you think about it, they're only 3 points behind the Rangers in fourth place. So even though they're at the bottom, but they're just a modest winning streak just to get themselves back in the playoff mix. But one surprise has been the Winnipeg Jets, and you knew that they were going to, use the pun, have their Jets cooled here at some point. Out of the gate, 8-0 with a loss, and then they won 7 in a row to where they were 15-1, the best start in NHL history. Well, boy, things have certainly turned rather quickly for the Winnipeg Jets, because since that torrid start of 15-1, they're 3-6. And the Minnesota Wild, who have been excellent here throughout this stretch, winners of 3 straight, and combine that with a 3-game losing streak by the Winnipeg Jets, although tied at the top of the division there in the Central, but the Minnesota Wild have the first place all to themselves, although they share it. But that just goes to show you that even with a start that the Jets have and them coming back to the pack, now they've been caught there in the division, although both teams have a 6-point advantage over the Dallas Stars, and the Stars trying to right the ship and do better here, as they haven't been too well, and I thought they'd be a lot better here throughout the first 23, 25 games or so, past the quarter pole of their season. But the Jets cooled off, Capitals playing well and flying high. And before I even look into anything else that's going on in the conferences, we talked about there what's happening in the Atlantic. Not much going on there. Any other teams with some big-time winning streaks? Nothing that I could see here. To take a look at the Pacific, you have the Golden Knights 2 points ahead of the LA Kings, 4 points ahead of Vancouver in the Pacific, and Edmonton trying to weave their way there as well. Again, suffering another slow start, but now righted the ship, and they're just 5 points behind the Vegas Golden Knights in the conference. Now, quickly, let's take a look at the schedules here as we lead into the middle part of the week. Tonight, you have the Devils and Rangers at the Garden, so that's a game you got to look for there with those two teams battling it out. In the Garden, you have, other than that, nothing else. San Jose or Washington, no biggie there. St. Louis, Winnipeg. Edmonton and Vegas, big game there tomorrow night, so you want to keep an eye on that. Certainly will do so. Dallas at LA, on Wednesday night. And then you have an original 6, Boston at Chicago. To anybody who cares. Nothing much to really sink your teeth into as far as the NHL schedule here early on. In the NBA, over the course of the next 3 days, you have the following. Miami at Boston, I guess because for old time's sake, with all their playoff appearances and their battles over the years, the Heat are up in Beantown. The Lakers are in Minnesota tonight. Your TNT games, Magic at the Knicks. And the Magic just finished playing the Nets over the weekend. And I believe they've won both of those games, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just take a quick peek at that. Orlando, where Where is that? That's Sunday. Yes, they did beat the Brooklyn Nets over the weekend, both games. So they stay in town here throughout the Thanksgiving weekend, and they'll play the Knicks tomorrow night. TNT game there. Your double dip will have Golden State at Denver. Other games of note, Memphis at Dallas, San Antonio at Phoenix. I bring up San Antonio because Victor Wembanyama got his third triple-double in his career, and now he's starting to take off here. And as I mentioned last week, the Spurs, you want to see them crack the playoffs this year. You want to see Wembanyama in some big games, so that's good for them. Other than that, you got nothing else. Houston at Sacramento, if you want to look at that. LA at Miami, the Lakers, that is. So they'll have a game down there. Orlando at Philly. I mean, the Sixers are awful, as we talked about before. And then you have Minnesota, who will play the Clippers there. Funny enough, they're playing the Lakers tonight in Minnesota, and then we'll go to LA to play the Clippers there on Wednesday. That's your NBA schedule throughout the last few days. And then let me wrap up. I know this is a bit past an hour, but this is what happens when the holiday and you're catching up on a week's worth of sports talk. Baseball. A week from today, really a week from yesterday, the hot stove will begin for Major League Baseball, but we'll really be into it a week from today, where I'm sure a lot's going to be bandied about with Juan Soto. And as I said before last week, and I'll say again, I'm not talking about him until he signs on the dotted line with the team. No more rumors, no more conjecture, no more possibilities, no more dark horses, no more lead-ins. So, now we got another team in the mix. I don't want to hear it. When he signs, we'll talk about it then. But for recent news, the Dodgers reload. Blake Snell, a guy that we've seen, two-time Cy Young Award winner, a guy that pitched a no-hitter there last year with the Giants, and a guy that certainly, when on his game, no doubt is a top 5 pitcher. And I'll even go as high as 5, but that's when he's on his game. Not when he's walking the ballpark, not when he's at 85 pitches in the 4th inning, when you know he's going to be gone in the 5th inning, and not a guy who's going to walk the ballpark. When Blake Snell is on, he's a guy that throws no-hit stuff, and we've seen that not only last year, but even in a World Series setting where he was taken out early in Game 6, as I've talked about a million times. But for Blake Snell, 5 years, $182 million deal to go along with Yoshinobu Yamamoto, where we think Shohei Ohtani is going to be a starting pitcher next year. Tyler Glasnow, if he gets healthy with his elbow, and a whole other cast of characters. Bobby Miller, Dustin May. I don't think Walker Buehler. Maybe the Mets could somehow get in there. Oh, wait, the Mets did make a signing. No, not for Walker Buehler. I'll get to that in a minute. But for the Dodgers, they're looking at this like, we won a World Series, but we want to continue to win. We want to have this window stay as wide open as we possibly can have it. And you got to give them kudos. That's the system. There's no salary cap. They're going to continue to stockpile. And there's another guy out there from Japan, Roki Sasaki, who could also possibly slide in there. I don't know if he's going to get $325 million. I'm sure whatever the fee is going to be to try to get him, and then whatever they negotiate, I don't think it's going to be in that stratosphere, but who knows? Maybe it's 5 for $150, $30 million a year. Quite possibly. That's not the rumor or the rumblings in regards to that, but pencil in Sasaki quite possibly with Yamamoto, with Ohtani, with Glasnow, with Snell, and you're going to have a starting 5 that could be as dominant as we've ever seen. And yes, we could say it's bad for baseball. Yes, we could say, this is why baseball needs a salary cap. Of course. You're not telling me anything new. They should have done something about this years ago. But obviously that's not going to be the case as of right this second until the next CBA is forthcoming. And even then, I'm sure there is not going to be a standoff on whether or not the salary cap is going to be implemented in Major League Baseball, which I think there should be. But that's besides the point. But the Dodgers, what more can you say? They are going to fortify and refortify their team to know that they have an opportunity to win more than one World Series, considering the first time they won in a 162-game regular season World Series since 1988. Yes, the pandemic season counts, but now that they've had the parade, and now that they'll raise the banners, and now that they'll have the ring ceremony on opening day next year, yes, they could also now see how they'll construct their roster moving forward. And they also signed Tommy Edman 5 years to a $74 million deal. More to their payroll. Another guy that fits in. He doesn't have to do a lot. More of a glue guy, lunch pail guy to complement the Mookie Betts, the Shohei Ohtanis, the Freddie Freemans of the world. A guy that just has to do his job. Get key hits, grind out at bats, work out walks, play good defense, and you're set. He's not a guy that's going to carry your team. He's not a guy that's going to have to shoulder the load, as you saw there in the NLCS winning an MVP, or getting big hits in the World Series, especially in that Game 5, where he was able to get on board to start that rally to where it all unraveled for the Yankees there in that decisive Game 5 to where the Dodgers won a World Series. So they're going to continue to stockpile as much as they can, and they've done so here over the past week. And then as far as the Mets go, all I'm going to say is Frankie Montas? Frankie Montas. Walker Buehler's out there, and I get it that he's going to be costly. But as I said before, and I'll say again, throw him a contract similar to Tyler Glasnow, where Glasnow, I believe, was at $438. He's 31 years old, coming off a lot of injuries. And I don't know if Scott Boras is his agent. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. But if it is or isn't, that's a handsome contract. And I get it. They probably don't want to give out a long-term contract, even to a guy like Walker Buehler, who has guts of a burglar. And they're going to go the safe route with Frankie Montas, who does have an opt-out after this year. But it's almost Luis Severino reincarnated, where they signed Severino last year, former Yankee, a guy that's had arm issues, but he did have a good year. And even though Severino and Quintana and Sean Manaea are still out there, not to say that they're going to be out of the equation, but one more time, especially if you're watching on YouTube. Frankie Montas? Come on. I get it that they're still probably looking at Soto, and maybe they are looking at Walker Buehler. I don't know. Frankie Montas, they have to bring in some pitching. And Montas, I don't care what he did in Milwaukee and early on with Cincinnati, that he pitched well and had flashes and had moments. To me, Montas, yes, he has a flurry of pitches and can top out at 96. To me, that is not the answer if you're asking. Just bring back Severino. Give him the $34 million deal with an opt-out. That would have been more, I get it, of a safer pick, but to me, that would have been a more logical choice, because we've seen Severino, we've seen what he's done, and not only that, I'm sure he's endearing to that Met locker room. Frankie Montas? I don't think so. And then a couple of quickies lastly. Did you see the Tampa Bay Rays in their schedule next year? 47 of their first 59 games are at home, which is going to be Steinbrenner Field, because the roof of the Tropicana Field was damaged because of Hurricane Milton, and it was not going to be fixed in time before the start of the 2025 season. It will for 2026. But where are they going to play for 2025? Oh, yes, Steinbrenner Field, where the Yankees train during their spring training. But the reason why they had to front load all those games is because once you get to July and August, especially July and August, you're going to have terrible weather, a lot of storms, possible hurricanes coming through. So therefore, they had to front load their home games in the first 2.5 to 3 months of the year, to where 69 of the final 103 games of the season are on the road. And in July and August alone, I believe it's July and August, 8 games at home that they'll play during the course of those 2 months. Can't make it up. And that's the thing. They're going to have to play outdoors. They're not going to play in Miami, where they could share a closed dome situation. They have a retractable roof, but they could play indoors. There's no other facility in Florida that they could play. And yes, the Marlins once upon a time did play in the old Miami Dolphin Stadium, and certainly had a ton of rainouts and a ton of delays and playing games well into the night. But with the Panhandle and a lot of hurricanes coming through those zip codes as opposed to South Florida, they had no choice but to play at Steinbrenner Field and to front load those games. What's Major League Baseball to do? They're not going to play at another neutral site to where they're going to get no fans at the games. They're going to have at least a smattering of their fans show up. And who knows how many are going to be there by game's end, especially when you're going to have rain delays left and right. I mean, what more can Major League Baseball do? I understand it's a bad job. They had to front load those games, they had to do what they had to do. But what more can you say if you're a Ray fan, the 4,000 of you that are out there, when you have to go to the other side from St. Petersburg to Tampa to watch the games and have to sit through rain delays on top of that? And then lastly, Brandon Crawford, the longtime San Francisco Giant shortstop, part of the back-to World Series of 2012 and 2014. Long career there at San Francisco. I believe he had 1 year in St. Louis last year after his free agent deal finished. Retired. Great career, long career. I'm sure he's probably going to have his number retired. I understand he wasn't a great player, not a Hall of Fame player, and maybe it's premature to give him a retired number. But of course, if you've been in an organization for a long time and have won World Series to boot, won World Series, not O-N-E-W-O-N, then chances are you're probably going to have a Ring of Honor or your number be raised to the top of the flagpole or at the top of the stadium there at Oracle Park. So kudos, congratulations to a great career there for Brandon Crawford. A very good defensive player, also a good clutch hitter too. So for him, rides off into the sunset. Best of luck to him in his next stop on wherever his career or his life takes him now that his baseball life has been closed shut. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. Again, a long one, but understood because of not having the podcast last week. But thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sport, in the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars, write a review on Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel at JReels, which is big. I continue to put on shorts or put up shorts there daily, and we'll do so. So please stay tuned to what's happening there. Go subscribe, like, leave a comment, do all that. Send it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, all that who love sports, like sports, casual sports fan, diehard sports fan, even the kook sports fan who loves it. Take a screenshot, share it with me on social media, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, JReels1 just a number, or if you want to have a question, comment, or suggestion sent my way, you could do so at the JReelsPodcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA from birth. Talking sports is what I love to do. Independent, podcaster, producer, doing this on a full-time basis. This is my job, people. I took the leap from corporate America to do this, to have streams of income. Help your boy out. Share with the family, with everybody who loves sports. Please, even YouTube, where I have lifestyle content, as I'm going to continue to post that as we get to the end of the year and into 2025. Nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, analysis, praise, feelings on anything and everything. That happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JReels Podcast, on the flip, baby.